Hi, I'm Kate Vacek. Thanks for joining me today for this talk about what you can learn from writing creative nonfiction. I am speaking to you today as a fellow writer. I'm actually new to creative nonfiction writing. I come from an academic writing background. I've published my research in peer-reviewed journals and academic books, and every day I coach doctoral students and faculty on academic writing. So I hope that if you are also a newbie when it comes to creative nonfiction writing, then you might recognize some of the challenges and joys that I'm going to share as I reflect on my experience thus far drafting a memoir. And if you are thinking about trying out this genre of creative nonfiction, I hope that I'll inspire you to give it a try. We are going to talk today about what is creative nonfiction, what the creative nonfiction writing process is like, and then what you can learn about craft, what you can learn about yourself, and what you can learn about the work of writing. So let's dive in. To begin to define creative nonfiction as a genre, I'm going to go to Lee Gutkind, who is considered by many the godfather of creative nonfiction. He founded Creative Nonfiction magazine, and he will point you to the banner on his magazine for a definition. True stories, well told. So to expand on that a little bit, creative nonfiction writers are going to use all of the tools at the disposal of fiction writers. They're going to have characters, they're going to have plot, they're going to have scenes, they're going to have settings, they're going to have dialogue, but the story has to be true. Lee Gutkind would say, you can't make this stuff up. And so the stories may be things that happened to the writer, in which case we're probably going to get into the memoir world, and that's what I've been working on. But the stories could also be about someone else. So to give a couple of examples, books you very likely have read at some point in your life, for example, of a story that is about somebody else, Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. Capote called this a narrative nonfiction novel, and that's the story of a murder that took place in Kansas in the 1950s, and Capote tells the story of the murders and then the trial and sentencing and execution of the killers. Another example, you might have read Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. So this is a story of Christopher McCandless, who was a young man from a well-to-do family. In the 90s, he left everything behind, sold all of his possessions, and went adventuring around the country, and eventually made it to Alaska, where he wanted to try living off the land, and sadly he died in the process. And Krakauer was very curious about how this happened, and he researched and told the story in his book Into the Wild. In the memoir world, so stories about the author, you very well have read Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. Gilbert talks about her process of healing after a divorce and going to live in Italy and India and Indonesia in the course of that, and her experiences along the way. And then another one that is near and dear to my heart and actually really inspired me to work on my memoir project is Heartland by Sarah Smarsh. Heartland tells the story of Sarah Smarsh growing up, her childhood in rural Kansas in a working class family. It's intertwined with stories of her family members and also with some social and historical context along the way. So there's a ton of examples of creative nonfiction out there. You're probably a fan as a reader. It's a really popular genre, and so many great examples to learn from and aspire to. Let's talk about what the creative nonfiction writing process is like. So thinking about what the creative nonfiction writing process is like, I'm going to share what I've been noticing as I've been involved in a memoir project and in the messy middle of drafting it. So let's talk first about research. I'm writing a memoir. Of course, a lot of the work is plumbing through my own memories and trying to just activate as much as I possibly can so I can recreate that on the page. But there's no way I could write the memoir without doing a whole bunch of research and relying on research materials. So for me, my research process started with a huge stack of handwritten journals that I've been keeping since I was about 9 years old. I just began reading through all of those journals, noting what patterns I was seeing, noticing particularly poignant moments that I might want to recreate. This is not an autobiography. I'm not trying to create the story of my entire life. It's just the story, one story of part of my life. But being able to go through the journals was helpful in thinking about the parameters of that story. Something that I did just to make my life a little bit easier was I did label all of the journals with the dates they covered and gave them a number so I could keep them in order, and it would make it a little bit easier for me to go back and find things because I have to go back and reference them all the time. So if you have a whole bunch of handwritten journals that you can't search, I would suggest doing something like that, some kind of archiving process, cataloging process. In addition to those journals, there's also documents about me that other people have created that I've been relying on. So things like school records, medical records, just tangential things like yearbooks can be helpful to go back and check someone's name or check a year that something happened. The medical records are quite interesting. It's very interesting to read a doctor's notes about a visit that you had. That can give you details and another person's point of view as well on something that happened. Aside from documents, interviews are really important. Obviously, if you are writing the story of something that you didn't happen to you, you weren't present, you're going to have to interview the people who were present, if you can, to get their point of view and to get the story. And even if you're writing memoir, there are other people in your story, and interviewing them is going to be helpful to get their point of view, as well as just information that they have that you don't have, so that you can tell your story accurately. Now, doing interviews means, of course, that you have persuaded people to let you interview them. So there's a whole process to go through with getting people on board and keeping them on board. And also, you're going to need to think about how you record the interviews. It's perfectly fine to take really good handwritten notes, but that's going to be more limited than, say, if you audio record and transcribe the interviews. Beyond the personal records and interviews, historical documents or other historical resources can be really helpful for scene setting. You have a historical time period that you are writing your story in. It could be pretty contemporary, but it could go way back in time. And so you'll need to get your facts straight about what was going on. Think about things like who was president, what songs might have been playing on the radio, what was the weather like on a particular date, what was the phase of the moon on a particular night and time. All of those kinds of details are actually pretty easy to get at. And depending on your subject matter, there might be some things that you have to do a bit more digging to find so that you can faithfully and truthfully recreate the world that you're writing about. Going into the drafting phase, I would say that my experience thus far with creative nonfiction has been that the drafting process is both a blessing and a curse. And a blessing in that I've often thought as I'm writing, when it's coming easily and the fingers are flying, it's like, I just need to get down what happened here. I know what happened. I don't have to invent anything. And it's just kind of a race to record the moment in time. And I've thought those moments, oh, this is so much easier than writing fiction. But the curse comes in when, I'm trying to write a scene and there just doesn't seem to be very much there. Maybe I'm kind of run out of documentation that I can get at, and I only remember what I remember, and maybe there's an important feeling or experience in the moment, but it just doesn't really lend itself to storytelling. It's not like a lot of action is happening, but I can't invent that. I can't make something happen that didn't actually happen. And in those moments, I think, I wish I was just writing a novel instead, and I could make whatever I wanted to happen. And then, of course, we have revision. Now, I've talked about research, drafting, and revision as though they're like separate phases. They're not really. You move back and forth between all of them all the time, of course. But with revision, what's been particularly challenging for me is finding a structure. As I said, I'm in the middle of a draft. I don't even have a complete draft yet, but I've been workshopping what I have and trying to find structure that will work for the reader. Chronological structure can sometimes work for stories, but not always. That's not necessarily the most engaging way to unspool your tale. So trying to figure out what kind of thematic structuring or narrative braiding or just different plot structures will work is a real challenge when you cannot invent what happened. So with that note about revision, I think that really takes us right into the next section, what you can learn about craft. So for me, coming from academic writing into creative nonfiction, what do you learn about craft? Basically everything. I'm learning everything about craft as I go. Since I was just talking about the revision process and looking for structure, why don't we start with talking about plot? As I said, this has been a real struggle for me. I feel like nothing has happened to me in my life. And so how do I plot this out? What I'm interested in is sharing what I've learned going through life, but it doesn't feel like there's a lot of action here. So you may be familiar with the hero's journey as a way to plot a novel or a screenplay. And the hero's journey could certainly work in some cases for creative nonfiction. If you have a character, whether that's you if you're writing memoir or someone else if you're writing somebody else's story, who's like very obviously moving towards a goal and they are overcoming obstacles along the way, the hero's journey might just be a perfect structuring device. So if you're not already familiar with the hero's journey, do a little Google search and you'll find lots of resources about different moments in that kind of a plot sequence that you could use to structure your story. For me, that does not seem to be an option. I have thought a lot about how I might craft my story that way, but it just didn't seem to be working very well. So I did some additional research looking at different kinds of plot structures that people might use either in fiction or creative nonfiction. And what I found and have landed on, I'm trying right now, is something called circular structure. So Eat, Pray, Love is an example of a memoir with a circular structure plot. And basically, you have a character who wants something and is making an attempt, but maybe doesn't make any progress or makes some progress, but it's not quite enough to actually resolve the issue. And then the cycle repeats itself and starts again. You have to raise the stakes each time. So in Eat, Pray, Love, Elizabeth Gilbert, she starts healing from her divorce by going to Italy and eating a lot of wonderful food, and she definitely is making progress, but it's not quite all the way there. And she goes on to India and etc. in Indonesia, and finally resolves with her final phase. So that's what I'm working out right now on mine. And there are, some other structures out there that you might want to try. So I recommend looking around the internet and talking to other writers, and of course, always looking at other books that you're enjoying that really speak to you as a reader, and see what they do. Now, moving on from plot, let's talk about scene for a moment, because everything in fiction and creative nonfiction then is built around scene. That's like the building block. And this has been extremely challenging for me as somebody coming from academic writing, which is not at all based on scene. It's a totally different building block there. I'm trying to learn how to do this. I was in a workshop specifically focused around building scenes, talking about plotting out each scene and thinking about what is the action, what's the transformation that's happening. Every scene needs to move the plot along. Some things I'm struggling with is scenes seem like they should probably be like kind of consistent in length somehow, and as I'm drafting, I'm just not finding that the case. So I'm trying to work that out. Just retooling myself to think just in storytelling mode, just creating a scene and not having any kind of commentary on the scene is something that I'm really working on right now. I want to talk for a minute about point of view. This has been a very interesting insight that came out of a workshop that I'm in right now working on my memoir. My readers had noticed that, different scenes were taking place in different points of time in the draft that I'd shared with them. Sometimes I'm a little kid, sometimes I'm a teenager, sometimes I'm me now looking back, talking about, analyzing, reflecting on whatever scene I just shared. And while there's consistency in that it's all me, those are very different versions of me. And the experience of the readers was that it was kind of disorienting because I was using first person for everything. And there are certainly memoirs that use first person throughout, and it works just fine. But what I was encouraged to do, and I'm trying to do now, is to experiment with changing up the point of view. So I'm trying to map like certain stages of my life. Maybe childhood, I'll be using second person. Maybe for my young adulthood, where like the main action of the story is taking place, I'll use third person. And I didn't think that I would be able to draft that way, but once I tried it, it was actually quite interesting. Using second person, so writing you feel this way, you notice this, it has been kind of interesting. It's actually reminiscent to me of a therapeutic technique where you write a letter to your younger self. Writing about myself in third person really helps to emphasize to me that as the author, I am creating a character. And how do I reveal that character to the audience? Somehow I really didn't have that sense when I was writing this in the first person, but it comes through a lot more for me when drafting in third person. So if you're working on a memoir or any other creative nonfiction piece, experiment a little bit with point of view and see what happens. Speaking of character development, particularly for memoir, where you are the main character in your story, is really interesting. That's going to bring us into my next topic, which is what can you learn about yourself through writing creative nonfiction. So, what can you learn about yourself from writing creative nonfiction? Let's talk about thinking about yourself as a character. If you're writing memoir, thinking about yourself and writing about yourself as a character raises all kinds of interesting questions. You start asking things like, what is this character's sacred flaw? What's the transformation that I am showing to readers, and what are the steps along the way in that transformation? And like I said, you can't make it up. So you really have to look at your own experiences very deeply, and there is no way you're going to come out of this experience without a whole bunch of new insight about yourself. And I think that this holds true regardless of whether you're writing memoir or if you're writing somebody else's story. You're going to get to know the main character very well one way or another, and you have to think about how you represent your understanding of that character to readers. How do you get your readers to like that character and get invested in that character? What is it that's invested you in that character? This has been really, really intriguing to me. I've always loved writing because of the process of discovery that it gives me. And this is probably the most intense one that I've ever experienced. There are going to be other characters besides your main character in the creative nonfiction tale that you are telling. And this is going to give you some insight into what you value in relationships. If you're telling someone else's story and that person is living, you are going to probably develop a very strong relationship with that person. And how is that coloring your choices about how you represent them? I feel like I have a little bit of a taste of this as a qualitative researcher working with research participants who have shared their stories with me that I then render in my research writing. There's a lot of respect that I have for those folks, and I need to both truthfully represent what they have shared and also honor their wishes in terms of how they're represented in the privacy and things like that. If you're writing memoir, you're writing about your loved ones, most likely. And they may or may not want you to share their stories. You have to decide where the value that you place in the relationship and the value that you place in telling this story, where they intersect and where one trumps the other. And that is not easy, but it is a decision you'll have to make, and you're going to learn something from doing that. My mother has asked me not to publish my memoir until after she's dead. And I don't know if I'm willing to honor that request. It's still on the table for now, and I know that there's going to be a long process of negotiation with people who are close to me as it becomes clear what exactly I'm going to be sharing about them and how I do that. Finally, another really important life lesson that I think we take away from working on creative nonfiction is how to be brave and vulnerable. This is both on the page with readers and in the process with yourself. If you're working on memoir in particular, this writing process is going to take you into places that you maybe didn't intend to explore, that you might not really want to go into, shining a light on things in dark corners that you'd maybe rather leave in the dark. You're really getting to know yourself. And that is not easy. But if you're committed to telling this story, you're going to find a way to do that. And that is going to teach you so much about being brave, being willing to take risks, being willing to examine things that are hard to do. So what can you learn about the work of writing? So this part of the talk is actually totally in my comfort zone as an academic writer, academic writing coach, someone who has a PhD in teaching writing. I know the writing process. And even though I'm working in creative nonfiction for the first time, the work of writing is the same. And I'm going to share some thoughts on how to stay on track, how to stay motivated, and how to work through problems. So, people come to me as a coach and ask me, how do I stay on track with my work? I want to finish this huge thing that I'm working on. And one of the key things that I help people with is to break the big task down. You don't know if you're on track if you don't know what the end product is and what the steps are along the way to get there. Now, that being said, you can't necessarily have a fully fleshed out vision of the end product when you start. It is going to come into focus along the way as you go. But if you're working on a book length work of creative nonfiction, research what the typical length of those things is. Then you have a target word count, right? Then you know how many words per week, for example, you have to generate to have a first draft that is approximately the correct length for the genre that you're writing in. Turn a writing problem into a math problem. It actually works, and it's the only way to move forward. It's the only way to know confidently that you're generating the work that you need to generate in order to stay on track. Breaking the thing down. So you might go into a creative nonfiction project with a pretty clear sense of what the plot points are and what the stories you need to tell along the way are. Depends on your subject matter. That might not be so clear to you, but spend some of your writing time actually strategizing as best you can what the different pieces of this thing are, so you can start to break down a book length work, say, into sections or possibly into chapters. If you're working on an essay length piece, again, what are the sections that you need to generate? And then, roughly assign word counts to those so you know when you have got a complete draft. You will have to pause and retool that along the way, because as you get further into the writing process, the whole structure might change. That's okay. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. Just keep that plan up to date, kind of a working outline. Keep that up to date so that you know what pieces you're trying to create. When you sit down to write, you don't have to think about the whole project. You've kind of got an assignment for yourself, right? Something that I do in my memoir project is I've just generated a whole bunch of little possible scenes that I might write, and I've just given them a title that means something to me. They'll trigger, okay, write the story of this, your first date, for example, right? And so then when I sit down to write, I don't have to do that planning work. I just need to generate. So have a plan, check in on the plan, I'd say weekly, to see if you're meeting a weekly goal. You must set aside time for writing. Schedule it, keep it sacred. It works best for people to actually have it on the calendar rather than just on the to-do list, because often so many other things that have to take place at certain times will take up all of the time that we have. So figure out for yourself what is a sustainable writing time each day or each week, and really do everything you can to stick to that. What can help you stick to that is accountability to other people. So I would encourage you to find an accountability partner or a writing group who can help you do that. I was very lucky that my sister wanted to work on a writing project at the same time that I started the memoir drafting, and we decided to be writing buddies. And every week we were accountable to send each other some writing, and that was really helpful for establishing the habit. And now I'm in a writing workshop where I'm in a group of other writers. We have deadlines. We need to generate something to share with the group and get feedback. The accountability partners and writing groups are also going to be huge for helping you to stay motivated. But in addition to other people helping you stay motivated, I think it's really important to get clear on why this project means what it does to you. Why are you willing to invest so much time and effort into this work? There's no one right motivation. It's going to be different for everybody. But if you haven't already, spend some time reflecting, maybe doing some journaling about that, so that when your motivation is waning, as it inevitably will, you can revisit that and stay connected to it, or have somebody else who you trust to remind you about that. Also, it's okay if the motivation changes over time. Books take a long time to write. You will change, and your motivation is probably going to change. That's okay. But know what it is for you. Know why you're choosing to do this. For me, I feel that I want to share my story because I want to connect with readers. I'm so grateful to other writers who have shared their stories, and that I, as a reader, have felt seen and heard when I recognized something that I've experienced in what they're saying. And I just feel called to give that gift back in return. So when I have shared my writing and people have told me that really resonated with me, thank you for sharing it, that is a huge motivator. So find ways to tap into that why, whatever it is for you. And problems, working through problems. It's going to be rough. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be stuck points. I've shared today many of the specific obstacles that I have faced and continuing to face, things I don't have solutions for yet. But I have been around writers and writing long enough to know that these things can be overcome if I stick with it, if I keep using my resources, keep looking at other examples, and keep talking to other writers and getting feedback. Eventually I'm going to figure out a solution to those challenges. If you're someone who has a hard time working through obstacles, take this as an opportunity for growth. Listen and hear me when I say, when you get to a stuck point, you come up against a challenge in the writing process, does not mean the project is no good. Does not mean that you are not a good writer. It just means that you're facing a challenge and you're looking for a way to find a way around it. If you're not good at doing that, reframe yourself. Find people who are, talk to them about it. They're going to help you reframe that. If you can make that shift in your thinking and be persistent in overcoming those challenges, it's going to serve you well in the writing process and in your life as well. So thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I hope you took something useful from it. I know I certainly did as I prepared this and thought about what I wanted to share with you all. Thanks. I wish you well in all of your writing projects. It was great to talk to you today.